Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Just agree to the terms, my fiance's sister said, sliding the thick stack of papers toward me like I was an intern signing onboarding forms. Her acrylic nails tapped the table in that impatient way people do when they believe they hold all the cards. This is for our protection, she added, her tone coated with the kind of politeness that always feels like a slap. Across from her, their mother chuckled without looking up from her tea. She's lucky we even accepted her, she said to no one in particular, as if I were a piece of furniture in the room, not a woman about to marry into their family. I didn't flinch. I just nodded, tracing the edge of the contract with my finger. Years of being underestimated had taught me the power of silence, how it makes arrogant people louder, bolder, and careless. My fiancé sat frozen, eyes flicking between his family and the document, as though he'd forgotten his spine at home. Beside me, my lawyer leaned in, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Do they know?" he murmured. "You funded their entire business?" A warmth spread across my chest, not anger, not pride, but clarity. Of course they didn't know. The investment had gone through a holding company I created years ago. When their family restaurant was on the verge of collapse, I stepped in quietly at my fiancé's desperate request. I didn't do it for credit. I did it for love. Funny how love rarely receives the same currency in return. The sister crossed her arms. "We just want to make sure that, if anything happens, our assets stay protected." "Our assets?" I repeated gently, lifting a brow. "Yes," the mother said, finally looking at me. "The family business has been in our name for generations. You bring nothing to it." My lawyer cleared his throat, not loudly. "Just enough to slice through the room? With respect," he said, voice calm and precise. "My client has been protecting your assets longer than you realize." Their eyes narrowed in unison. He slid a folder from his briefcase and opened it slowly, like he had all day. "This," he said, turning it toward them, "is the transfer agreement for the $1.8 million investment your company accepted 3 years ago. Without it, your expansion and debt restructuring would have been impossible. The holding company that funded you?" He paused. "It's hers." No one spoke. The silence was sharp enough to cut glass. The sister blinked. Twice. The mother's teacup rattled against its saucer. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to gloat. I simply folded my hands and looked each of them in the eye. "I was willing to sign something fair," I said softly. "But I won't sign away my dignity. Not when I've already invested more in your family than you ever assumed I had to give." Their mother's face shifted first, from arrogance to recognition to something that looked a lot like fear dressed as respect. The sister opened her mouth, then closed it again. I watched her ego deflate in real time. My fiancé finally reached for my hand under the table. Too little. Too late. I slid the contract back across the glossy wood surface. "I suggest," I said, "we draft terms that protect everyone equally, or we walk away from the table entirely." My lawyer didn't need to add a thing. The power had already shifted. "Just agree to the terms," my fiancé's sister said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She pushed the contract toward me like she was granting me access to a kingdom I should be grateful to enter. The thick stack of papers landed in front of me with a soft thud, heavy with clauses they assumed I wouldn't question. Her tone carried that brittle sweetness reserved for people they deem beneath them, civil on the surface, cutting underneath. I could feel every set of eyes in the room waiting for my reaction. The sister sat up straighter, clearly expecting me to sign without reading, as though my presence here was an opportunity I should cling to. Her posture said she believed she was doing me a favor by letting me sit at the table. "This is for our protection," she added, tapping one glossy nail on the top page. The word "our" hung in the air like a velvet rope meant to keep me on the other side. It was carefully chosen, a reminder that I wasn't one of them, just someone hoping to be let in, across from her. Their mother let out a low chuckle, the kind that comes from a place of entitlement so deep it doesn't recognize itself. She didn't bother looking at me when she said, "She's lucky we even accepted her." The casual cruelty of it didn't surprise me. I'd been in this family's orbit long enough to recognize how they dressed disrespect and decorum. They wielded lineage like a weapon, and believed acceptance was a gift they could dangle over anyone they deemed unworthy. I didn't meet the insult with protest. I didn't shrink from it either. I simply nodded once, masking the flicker of emotion behind steady eyes. Over time, I'd learned that silence unnerves the self-assured more than any argument ever could. They mistake it for compliance, for smallness, for lack of power. They never realize it's the calm before a reveal. My fiancé sat to my right, shoulders tense and jaw locked. He avoided meeting my eyes, and in that moment, I saw the quiet discomfort of a man torn between loyalty and fear. He wasn't arrogant like the rest of them, but he was used to their dominance, shaped by their judgments, softened by their money. He had asked me to be understanding, to keep the peace. I chose not to. Remind him how often peace only seems to matter when a woman is the one expected to hold it together. I rested my fingers on the contract but didn't open it. I didn't need to see the specifics to know what was inside. Restrictions dressed up as agreements, safeguards written as ultimatums, limits built to protect their assets from the woman they'd already decided brought nothing of value. I could practically hear the narrative they'd crafted. She should feel grateful. She should understand her place. She should take what she's given and not make a scene. But I had no intention of playing the role they'd cast for me. I stayed quiet, letting the weight of the moment settle around us. Years of dealing with people who underestimated me had trained me well in the art of patience. I learned that you don't need to raise your voice when you already know the truth sits on your side of the table. Instead of reacting, I let them believe their words had landed the way they intended, like instructions to someone dependent, someone grateful, someone desperate to belong. The contract remained untouched in front of me. I traced the edge of the top page lightly, not to read it, but to give my hands something to do while I read the room instead. My silence made them comfortable, and comfortable people show their true faces. The sister leaned back with a smug kind of satisfaction, the kind that comes from thinking a battle has already been won. Their mother sipped her tea like the matter was settled, not even acknowledging the possibility that I might refuse. I noticed the details they assumed I'd ignore, the way the clauses were sectioned to appear standard, but were worded to strip me of any rightful claim. The subtle hint that I was an outsider only included on their terms. The underlying message that this union was a favor, not a partnership. Their language didn't just protect their interests. It erased mine before I'd even signed my name. I glanced briefly at my fiancé, who still hadn't said a word. His silence wasn't cruel, but it was cowardly. I could see the pressure in the tightness of his shoulders, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the table as though looking at me might force him to take a side. I understood more than he realized. He wasn't malicious, just conditioned. He loved me, but he feared the weight of his family's expectations more than he feared losing my respect. In his mind, keeping peace meant keeping quiet. What they didn't understand is that I'd spent my entire life moving through rooms like this, places where people judged me before I spoke, where my worth was measured in assumptions. I'd learned to let others talk, to let them reveal themselves while I said little. There is a quiet kind of power in being underestimated. It gives you room to observe, space to choose your moment, leverage to decide when to speak and when to simply let silence do the work. So I let them think my nod was agreement. I let them believe my calm was compliance. I let the air stretch just enough that they relaxed into their own arrogance. Because people who think they've already won never see the shift coming until it's too late. My lawyer leaned in then, his voice barely above a whisper, pitched so only I could hear. Do they know you funded their entire business? The question wasn't meant to be answered, it was a reminder. A quiet nudge at the truth sitting silently in my corner of the room. I didn't look at him right away. I kept my eyes on the contract as though I were still considering it. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. The people so eager to protect themselves from me had no idea their livelihood was built on my investment. They sat there speaking about their legacy with the confidence of those who never imagined the foundations could belong to anyone else. 3 years earlier, when their family business was on the edge of collapse, it wasn't a bank, relative, or silent partner that saved them. It was me. Not by name, not with fanfare, but through a holding company I'd created long before I met them. My fiancé had come to me, not with entitlement but desperation. The business meant everything to his parents, their status, their pride, their identity. And because I loved him, I didn't hesitate. I signed the paperwork quietly, wired the money, and never once asked them for acknowledgement. That was my mistake. I assumed integrity would be met with respect. They'd rewritten the story over time, telling themselves they'd recovered through grit and discipline, crediting smart restructuring and family resilience. I let them have their narrative. I didn't correct them. Power doesn't always need to be announced, and real influence doesn't need an introduction. As my lawyer's words echoed in my mind, a calm certainty settled over me. I realized that I'd been giving them the benefit of a grace they'd never extend to me. They built walls around themselves with the same hands that had accepted my help. They thought I had nothing at stake because they never imagined a woman like me could be the reason their lights were still on. I lifted my eyes then, and for the first time since I sat down, I really looked at each of them, not as people whose approval I needed, but as people living inside a story they didn't know I authored. They still believed I was here hoping to be included, unaware that I'd already been holding up the roof they were so sure I couldn't afford to walk under. Their arrogance had kept them comfortable. My silence had kept them blind. And now, the two would collide. The sister crossed her arms, her expression smug in a way that only comes from being certain she held the upper hand. "We just want to make sure that, if anything happens, our assets stay protected," she said, emphasizing the word "our" like a line drawn in permanent ink. I let the word hang there for a moment before repeating it softly. "Our assets?" She didn't catch the shift in my tone. Arrogance makes people deaf in very specific ways. She simply nodded, confident she'd made a reasonable point. Before I could say another word, her mother chimed in, voice as polished as the pearls around her neck. "The family business has been in our name for generations. You bring nothing to it. Nothing. It always comes back to that word, spoken with the certainty of those who never question what they haven't bothered to learn." She finally looked at me then, expecting compliance, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, I held her gaze, not defiantly, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet, knowing that unsettles the unexamined ego. My lawyer chose that moment to clear his throat, not disruptive, just decisive enough to cut through the illusion of control in the room. He didn't raise his voice or posture. He simply shifted the air with calm authority. "With respect," he said, each word slow and exact. "My client has been protecting your assets longer than you realize." The transformation in the room was immediate, but subtle. They didn't react with outrage, not yet. They reacted with confusion, and then suspicion, the kind that makes people glance at each other when they don't know where a sentence is going. Their mother straightened in her chair. The sister leaned forward slightly, as though proximity might help her understand. My fiancé finally looked up, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through his silence. My lawyer reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder, thick but organized, the kind of folder that ends an argument before it begins. He opened it with unhurried precision, knowing the power of deliberate movement in a room full of assumptions. "This," he said, turning the top document toward them, "is the transfer agreement for the $1.8 million investment your company accepted 3 years ago. Without it, your expansion and debt restructuring would have been impossible. The holding company that funded you..." He paused just long enough for the tension to crystallize. "It's hers." The quiet that followed wasn't simple silence. It was impact, dense, immediate, heavy enough to shift the air itself. No one moved. The sister's mouth parted slightly. The exact moment arrogance gives way to comprehension. Their mother's hand stilled around her teacup, the porcelain giving a soft clink against the saucer. My fiancé looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw the realization settle across his face like a shadow. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The reveal had already rewritten the room. I didn't rush to fill the silence. There's a particular kind of stillness that follows truth when it lands exactly where it was meant to. I sat with it, letting the weight of it do what words never could. Their expressions shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways, eyebrows tensing, lips parting, posture straightening as the balance of power quietly rearranged itself. The sister was the first to blink, her confidence folding inward as the math began to add up in her head. The mother kept her chin high, but dignity has a hard time surviving impact when built on the belief that others have less. I folded my hands gently in my lap and finally lifted my gaze to meet theirs one by one. There was no anger in me anymore, just clarity. I had spent too much time and love giving them the benefit of intentions they never actually held. "I was willing to sign something fair," I said, my voice calm and steady. There was no need to raise it. Truth speaks loudest when it's unbothered. But I won't sign away my dignity. Not when I've already invested more in your family than you ever imagined I had to give." Their mother opened her mouth like she wanted to reply, but nothing came out. Her certainty had been built on the assumption that I was asking for a place at their table, when in reality, I'd already paid for half the furniture. The sister looked down at the contract as though seeing it for the first time, suddenly aware of how ridiculous it appeared now that the foundation of their assumptions had cracked open. The arrogance she'd worn so confidently minutes before had vanished, replaced by the quiet confusion of someone realizing the story was never theirs to dictate. My fiancé's hand moved under the table, reaching for mine. I felt his fingers brush my palm gently, not as a claim but as an apology he couldn't yet put into words. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. Some truths change more than rooms. They change the ground people stand on. I slid the contract back across the polished wood surface, with an ease that made it clear I was no longer playing by their script. "I suggest," I said evenly, "we draft terms that protect everyone equally, or we walk away from the table entirely." There was no threat in my words. Just reality, plain and unshaken. My lawyer remained silent beside me because there was nothing left for him to add. The room already knew. The balance had already shifted. The decision now wasn't mine, it was theirs. No one spoke right away. The room, once so comfortably loud with assumption, now held its breath around me. Their mother was the first to look away, her eyes drifting to the untouched contract like it had turned into something poisonous. The sister shifted in her seat, shoulders pulled tight, as if bracing against a truth she hadn't seen coming. The tone they had greeted me with, the superiority, the entitlement, the certainty, had evaporated so completely it was almost startling. For the first time since I'd walked through their door, I didn't feel like I was standing on their ground. I was standing on my own. My fiancé finally found his voice. "We'll redo the agreement," he said quietly, the words careful, sincere, and edged with the shame of someone who had just realized the cost of his silence. He didn't look at his mother or his sister. He looked at me, but I didn't answer him right away. This wasn't about a contract anymore. This was about respect, about truth, about the difference between being accepted and being tolerated. I stood up slowly, gathering my bag with grace they hadn't expected me to possess. "When you're ready to have a conversation built on honesty and equality," I said, "you know how to reach me." I didn't raise my voice or wait for permission to leave. My lawyer stood too, and together we walked toward the door. I didn't rush, didn't look back. The quiet behind me said more than any apology could. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, clearer, like I had finally taken my place in a story I'd been writing all along. Because here's the truth no one can bury. You don't earn your worth by shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. You don't prove your value by begging to be seen. And you don't need acceptance from those who only respect you when they think you bring nothing. Some rooms only recognize your power after they realize they're standing in it.